Good evening, everyone, and welcome to 30 minutes of Torah study for the Torah portion of Vayigash. So Paro has two dreams. Yosef interprets the two dreams as 7 years of plenty, followed by 7 years of famine. In the interpretation, Yosef gives the instructions on how to plan for it all. Paro appoints Yosef to lead the way. The 7 years of plenty happen. There's great abundance in Egypt, followed by 7 years of famine, devastation, and destruction. The nation of Egypt turns to Yosef. What does he do? Text number 1. And Yosef collected all the money that was found in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan with the grain that they were buying. And Yosef brought the money into Paro's house. Now the money was depleted from the land of Egypt and from the land of Canaan, and all the Egyptians came to Yosef saying, "Give us food. Why should we die in your presence, since the money has been used up?" And Yosef said, "Give me your livestock, and I'll give you food in return for your livestock, if the money has been used up." So they brought their livestock to Yosef, and Yosef gave them food in return for the horses and for the livestock in flock and in cattle and in donkeys, and he provided them with food in return for all their livestock in that year. So Yosef bought all the farmland of the Egyptians for Paro, for the Egyptians sold each one his field, for the famine had become too strong for them, and the land became Paro's. So Yosef organized an entire restructuring of the entire economy in Egypt, and through that restructuring was able to provide for all the needs of the people who lived in the land. The Talmud comments on Yosef's storing away and makes this statement. Rabbi Chama, the son of Rabbi Chanina, said, Yosef concealed 3 buried treasures in Egypt. The location of one was revealed to Korach, and the location of one was revealed to Antoninus, the emperor of Rome, and one remains hidden for the righteous in the future, that is, in the Messianic era. And we need to understand exactly this statement of the Talmud and what its implication is for what Yosef was doing. We understand that Yosef is collecting money, collecting fields, collecting horses, donkeys, and so on, because he needed to provide for the needs of the people in Egypt. Why would Yosef be burying treasures for some future time, for some future era? So the answer is that when we approach the story, we have to recognize this is not just a history book. The Torah is not just telling us about the lives, the events, the stories that took place to our ancestors so many years ago. While yes, it is history, the Torah is so much more. We're talking about a biblical story with big biblical characters, biblical figures, which means that it's a story that has cosmic significance. It's a story that is relevant for all times and for eternity. And with that in mind, we have to look at the story with completely different glasses. So let's unpack the story a little bit. First of all, when we talk about Yosef, we don't just mean Yosef as a ruler, our ancestor, so many thousands of years ago at this particular point in time in history, but we're talking about Yosef as the prototypical shepherd of the Jewish people for all time. Not just that generation, but every generation and for all generations in the future. Yosef, in that biblical story, was a cosmic figure that was relevant for all future generations, representing the ultimate in what a Jewish leader is all about. The story talks about money. Yosef gathered and collected money. The Kabbalah tells us when the Torah tells us about money, it is actually telling us something much deeper. The word in Hebrew for money is kesef. That's the same root as the word kosef, which means longing, which means love, which means on a deeper level, we are referring to the love that the Jewish people have for God. Let's go to Rabbi Yaakov Yosef Alponai. He writes, the Hebrew word kesef carries 2 translations. One is the literal money, and the other is yearning, desire. Accordingly, the verse that states im kesef talve, literally when you will lend money, can be interpreted as when a Jew passionately yearns, kesef, to connect loiva with God. So when you look at the story from a historical perspective, in a literal reading of the Torah, yes, Yosef was storing money to provide for the needs of the people of that generation. However, when we recognize and we look at it through the lens of a biblical story with cosmic significance, what are we referring to? We are referring to a Jewish leader who was storing up love that the Jewish people would have for God. For when there is a time when the Jewish people will suffer from spiritual fatigue, there will be a reserve. There will be a reservoir of love, of spiritual energy, which they could draw out from and utilize in the future. Rabbi Dov Ber Lubavitch writes, we can now understand the verse, O shepherd of Israel, hearken, he who leads Joseph like flocks. Shepherd of Israel means that he feeds the Jewish people with love, fear, and faith in God. This then is what the verse states, he who leads Joseph like flocks. For it is Joseph who infuses the Jewish soul with an innate hidden love for God. This love is bestowed to the Jew from on high unilaterally, and it is commensurate with the supernal level of Yosef. So Yosef foresaw that the Jewish people will one day, as a result of terrible exiles and persecutions, no Beis Hamikdash, no prophets, going to feel incredibly spiritual fatigued. How do we have a love for God? How do we have a passion for God? How is there a desire from God when we've experienced so many years of exile? What did he do? He worked at that time back then to ensure that there will be a vast spiritual reservoir for the Jewish people to tap into. He collected, he buried, he gathered this treasure trove of love for Hashem that would be available to us when needed. Due to the hardships and stress of making a livelihood during this bitter exile, godliness is hidden from plain view to a great degree. As such, it happens that even when performing a mitzvah, a Jew doesn't feel the energy and bright godly light associated therewith. This is due to a diminished capacity to properly contemplate on matters. As a result of exile for so long, the Jewish people would completely fall away from God, distant and severed with increasingly diminished amounts of godly light. Eventually, the capacity to perceive God would be completely forgotten, to the extent that not a trace of godly love would be left. All energy would be sapped out. But God had mercy on his people, so he sent the righteous Joseph ahead to be a literal lifesaver for every Jewish person in every generation. So what is the nature of this reserve, this love that Yosef buried that would be available for the Jewish people? We continue with the words of the Mitzvah Rebbe. This then is what Yosef was saying with the words, for it was to preserve life that God sent me before you. This supernal light of love that is buried within the soul of every Jew in every generation is a lifesaver and a refuge throughout the long exile. It ensures that the love for God will never be forgotten from their hearts, that the Jewish people will never be sapped of all emotional energy to perceive God. This is credit to the innate, hidden, godly love that is sourced in the loftiest levels of God himself and is bestowed to every Jewish soul. As such, every Jew possesses a godly spark that is capable of intense, natural love for God, a passionate desire to connect with God, never wishing to budge from that intense relationship, despite any challenge that might come. This love is called a hidden love, deep in the potential of every Jew. It is bestowed from on high and comes suddenly without any preparation. It transcends all reason, yet it is there, deep in the heart of every Jew, and only needs to be teased out from potential to practice. This too comes from the righteous Yosef. Thus, this great love never terminates. Despite the lengthy exile and everything that disorients the heart and mind's real focus, this light is never extinguished. There's something that exists in the heart and the soul of every Jew that does not have to be created, does not have to be invented, it doesn't have to be trained. It's natural. You're born with it. It's part of your very identity. Whether you went to yeshiva or not, whether you're a person who is observant or not, there's a connection that a Jew has with our people and with God on the deepest level. And when it comes under threat, right, a Jew, even the least observant, can arouse such a fierce sense of self-sacrifice and commitment to his Jewish identity and to people. How? Where does it come from? It's not logical, it's not normal, it's not rational. Yosef planted this within us way back when in Egypt. So we would be able to have this for the future. Regarding this love that Yosef planted into the hearts, into the souls for each and every one of us for when we need it, the Zohar refers to Yosef as a gardener. This light was planted by God in the Garden of Eden by way of that righteous one, Yosef. He is the gardener who takes that light and plants it as a true plant. During exile, the gardener doesn't go into the garden, but that light that was originally planted always produces fruits and buds. It continues to produce on its own as the first time. Yosef buried seeds of love within the fertile ground of the collective Jewish soul for it to thereafterwards grow. How does a gardener function? A gardener puts seeds into the ground, and then afterwards they will continue to grow and to develop. The Alter Rebbe writes, all of this love planting is performed by the righteous Yosef, who is called the gardener, who draws down the godly light in the garden, which is the source of all Jewish souls. This then is the deeper significance of, and Yosef collected all the money. Namely, he gathered all the levels of supernal love and kindness. Yosef is the gardener who draws down this innate hidden love into every Jew. This then is the meaning of the verse, and he brought the money into Paro's house. According to Kabbalah, Paro's house is synonymous with the garden that is the source of all Jewish souls. Now, what takes place in a garden? There are two ways that produce grows from a garden. Number one, it is a result of your hard work. You dig, you plow, you plant, you weed, ultimately you're going to harvest. However, there's another option, and that is produce that grows on its own. It grows on its own because previously something was planted there, and there are seeds that remain, there are seeds that fall, there are seeds that somehow are in that environment of the ground, and without any further work in the future, those are going to grow on their own as well. We could apply exactly the same thing to the love that a Jew has for God. There is a love that is born, that is created from intense effort. Study, meditation, devotion, commitment over many years can create and develop a love that is deep, passionate, pure, and fiery. It's a lot of effort. But then there is a type of love that comes on its own, that does not have to be created, that is natural, that exists within the mind, the heart, and the soul of every Jew. The Rebbe explains the difference between these two types of love mirrors the difference between the two types of growth. There are one, crops that grow through active human efforts, and two, there are crops that grow on their own, not from this planting, but from a previous planting that fell there from the past. And so it is with the two types of love. Love that is developed through the cognitive process is similar to crops that grow directly from the efforts of this season's planting. By contrast, when the hidden love manifests itself, it is akin to crops that pop up on their own from a previous planting, for the love that was indeed planted in the soul long ago in the past. So how is it that we have this love today, each and every single Jew? Because it was planted so many years ago. Therefore, it grows on its own today. How do we have that natural love? Because Yosef, the great shepherd of the Jewish people, the great leader of the Jewish people, planted it for us way back then. This planting of hidden natural love in every Jew was accomplished by the righteous Yosef, which is why he is called the gardener. He plants and draws down godly light in the garden that is the source of all Jewish souls. When this hidden natural love expresses itself in the life of every Jew, it is a direct outgrowth of Yosef's efforts. It may feel like it comes out of nowhere, as if it comes completely on its own. But in reality, this feeling is also something Yosef planted in the soul of every individual Jew. Now, serving Hashem, based on this natural love that we have, based on our core Jewish identity, is beautiful, but it's not ideal. Ultimately, right, it should be passionate and fiery. And that is going to be what happens when Mashiach comes. So that's why it said that there were 3 reservoirs that would hidden away. Ultimately, when Mashiach comes, that is when we are going to experience the most fiery, the most passionate, the most revealed love that we have for Hashem. Then we will unpack the 3rd and final reserve hidden away by Yosef. What are we supposed to do until then? So number 1, of course, we need to develop the natural love that we have for Hashem. We have to think about our Jewish identity, what it means to be a Jew, and how therefore the most obvious and natural thing for a Jew to behave and to do is to do Jewish things. Torah mitzvah, that's the most natural thing. But there is more that we can do, that is to learn, and that is to study Torah, and specifically the teachings of Chassidus. Because the teachings of Chassidus are likened to wine. What does wine do? Drink a little wine, and all of your secrets come out. Study a little Chassidus, and your neshama is going to come out. Your soul is going to come out. The way to actually experience this type of love is through deep thought, namely by learning the wine of Torah, the inner dimension of Torah, which has the ability to pull out secrets. It can even bring about the manifestation of the deepest secret of all, the future redemption. So what is the practical takeaway that we have from the story from the Parsha? Is how should a person feel when you don't feel motivated, you don't feel excited, you don't feel inspired? Maybe it's really cold outside. It's dark in the morning to go to shul. Or it's cold on Shabbos when it comes to walking in shul. Don't feel dejected. Remember that Yosef has stored away. He's got your back, right? Yosef stored away the most powerful spiritual resources. Reflect upon your Jewish identity, that you are a Jew, briefly, just for a moment, and you will feel it flow through your mind, through your heart, through your soul, into your body, and the energy will going to be there. One way to look at it is, right? Imagine a great uncle passed away, left you a tremendous inheritance, wealth beyond anything you can imagine. All you have to do is use it. All you got to do is use it. Exactly the same thing. Yosef left for us an inheritance, spiritual wealth that we can't possibly imagine. What do we have to do? Use it. Utilize that Torah mitzvah. Just tap into it, and you'll see all of the wealth coming to the fore. Thank you so much for joining us for another week of 30 minutes of Torah study. God willing, we'll see you next week. Have a wonderful Shabbos and a great night.